Hey everyone, in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a texture sheet. This can be used in all of your UV mapping for your game development. It's a really great idea. Game developers use them because you basically make one master library sheet of multiple textures, and then you just bring in that one texture sheet to your game engine, like Blender 3D, and then it's a master library where you can just go ahead and keep using it. So let's get started. Okay, so here is a Google Doc with a whole bunch of free texture sites, as you can see here. And I've already gone ahead and downloaded about I downloaded 5. Here's my 6th one, a nice metal texture. I'm going to just go ahead and save the image as. We'll just call this metal 1. Okay. Good. All right, so I've got Krita here. I've got on my desktop, I've got these various textures here. I'm only going to want 6 of them, so I'm going to go ahead and delete one of them. There we go. Okay, so now I've got my 6 here. Now I'm choosing 6 just because that's a decent number. It gives me a little bit of variety. You could make this as big as you want. You could make, 30 or 40. You probably wouldn't want to go much bigger than that because then your texture size gets really huge. Okay, so basically what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to make a grid of textures. And so it's going to look something like this, where I have maybe 3 on top and 3 on the bottom. All right, so you have to kind of decide how big you want each one of these to be. And that's going to determine then how big the overall texture is. So I'm going to choose a size of 512 pixels. And that number 512 comes from using some of the usual numbers for textures, like 64 pixels, 128, 256, and then they double. So I'm going to use 512 because I think it's somewhere nice in the middle. So what I want to do is I want to figure out what is 512 pixels times 3, and then what's 512 times 2. So I'm going to go ahead and do 512 times 3. So I'm on a Mac, so I can actually click on the little magnifying glass, and I can go ahead and actually type in the math problem, 512 asterisk 3, and that then gives me 1,536. And of course, 512 times 2 is 1024. That one we know. All right, so now that I know my 2 numbers, and obviously if you're not on a Mac, just go ahead and use your phone, get a calculator. There you go, you'll figure that out. All right, so I'm going to go into my Paint program. This time I'm using Krita. I'm going to choose New File, and I'm going to go ahead and type in those numbers there. So again, 1536 for the width. That will give me 3 tiles wide, and 1024 high will give me 2 tiles wide, 72 for the resolution, and click on Create. Okay, so there we are. So now what I want to do is I want to turn on the grid so I can actually see my grid setup. So I'm going to do that in Krita by going to the Settings menu, Dockers, and then Grids and Guides. It's normally going to show up down here probably in one of your corners here. And I just tore it off so I could show you better. Okay, so what you want to do when you find the grid panel is you want to click on Show Grid, and then right here it's going to say X spacing and Y spacing. And I'm going to change the spacing to 512 because that's how big I want my grid spaces to be. Okay, so that is pretty much it there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the grid spacing. Okay, so now the question is, how do I get my photographs in here so I can then place them? All right, so I'm going to show you one of the easier ways to do this. So I'm going to move everything off to the side so you can see my panel here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring in my very first one. I'll bring in the rocks. I'm just going to drag and drop it in. And when you do that, you'll see it gives you this option, Insert as New Layer, which is really cool. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just bring in a few of them here just to get that process in. And you'll see that they just start stacking on top of each other. And I think for this demo, I'll just maybe do 4. I won't make you watch me do all 6. And then I'll show you maybe the finished one. Okay, so here's my 4 over here. I'm going to go ahead and hide by clicking on the little eyeball. I'm going to hide all of them and kind of focus my attention on this rock one here. All right, so your Krita might look a little different than mine, your layout, and that's because up here in the top right-hand corner, you can click on this and you can change your workspace, and the default Krita workspace would look something like that. So that's maybe what most of you probably have on your screen. So let me reset mine like that. Okay, so now we're only a few steps away. So now, there we go, now we can see things. So now I need to go ahead and I need to grab this tool over here, which is the free transform tool. And it's a little box with little bumps on it. And this then is going to give you these little control handles going all the way around it. You can see that better. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to put your mouse pointer on one of the corners, and you're going to hold down the Shift key first, then click and drag your mouse. And by Shift clicking, it will make sure that the height and the width of the photograph stays the same. Now, this is an interesting problem here. I've got a perfect square that I need to fill, but I've got a rectangle photograph. So what do you do? When you've got a rectangle image and you need to fill a square space, you could do a couple of things. You could just leave it like this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you an example of what happens when you leave it like that. So you could leave it like this. You could also just click and drag, and you could distort it. The question is, when you distort it, how bad is the distortion? And so there we go. I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that. You can see there is some stretching there. And so that could be one solution. And so since I'm doing 6 of these, I'll leave some examples of them, and that way you can kind of see. The other thing you can do is that if I didn't distort it, is you could duplicate it. So let's say I leave it like this, so it's a rectangle. Then what I could do is I could come over here to my layers list, excuse me, and I could click on this button here and I could duplicate it. And now I've got a second one. And so now I can actually click and I can drag and I can put the second one, you know, right underneath it there. And you can see a seam, so I'm not really enjoying that. And of course there are ways you can deal with the seam, like doing some erasing and stuff like that. I don't have my pen and tablet here, but if I were to take my brush, and turn it into an eraser, I could come in here and just do a little bit of erasing on that texture, and you can see that it's cleaning that up. So the seam isn't nearly as bad. So that's looking, you know, a little better right now. It is still repeating, and you can see that. But we'll go ahead and go with that. Okay. So next, and again, you just repeat. You select your layer. You click on the tool. You hold down the Shift key, and you click and you drag. And again, you can see here I've got another example of the rectangle trying to fit into a square. So on this one, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a rectangle because I really don't want to distort this one. And I'm just going to get it right up to the grid. And the grid will not be seen inside the Blender. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like that, and we'll see what it looks like when it goes inside your game app. It means that when you do your UVs, you're only going to put your UV going across this area here. If you're not going to have it going across here because there's nothing there. Okay, the next one. And again, the process is the same. Okay, so on this one, it's concrete. I'm going to say that on this one, you can go ahead and probably get away with distorting it with things like patterns like this. I think you can distort it and just make it fit, and it works. The other solution is only look for textures that are perfectly square. And I'll be honest with you, when you go searching, if you look for seamless textures, so if I type in metal texture seamless and I add in the word seamless to it, you'll see that I do get a lot that are perfectly square. And so you can see right here 1024 by 1024. A lot of these are really good. Let's see if I can maybe download this one here real quickly. Okay, so I downloaded a metal texture that was seamless, and if you don't already know, seamless means that if it repeats itself, you're not going to see any seams, so that's really nice. Okay, so this is 1024 by 1024, which is exactly half of what I'm doing, or sorry, twice of what I'm doing, 512 by 512, and so there we go. This looks pretty darn good. So that's a good example right there. Okay, so to finish up this video, this is what I would be considering done. These textures, of course, are very random. They don't have much to do with each other. This might not work out, but this could work out for an environment. You have a variety of environments here. Okay, so finishing steps here. You would come over here to your layers, and you would hide the bottom background layer by clicking on the little eyeball there. And then you would see the checkerboard here, then telling you that you would have a transparent background. So I would go ahead and do 2 saves. This is really important. So in Krita, I would do file save. You would want to go ahead and save to your folder. I'm going to save to my texture sheet folder. And whether you're using Krita or Photoshop or one of the other paint apps, you would always want to save your document, in this case, as a Krita document. And that's because I want to save with all my layers set up. And I'm going to go ahead and call this text sheet master. There we go. So this is the original one. This one has all the layers. I can always come back to it. I can add to it. You can even, if you decide you need more textures in here, like if I wanted 8 instead of 6, I could increase the canvas size and do that. So you always want that. That's your original backup. Okay, now I'm ready to do another save. So I'm going to do a file save as, and this would be the file that you could then bring into your game engine. So you'd want to save, you'd want to change the file type, and you'd want to save it as a PNG, a ping. And you can change the name. You know, instead of master, maybe I could call it, you know, final or something like that if you knew. And in Krita, I'll just hit save. I'll click on OK. And there you go. You could bring this into Blender. Okay, so I'm going to bring this into Blender. If you have no idea what this is, please watch one of my earlier videos in this playlist so you can see it. So when I go ahead and I go to open, go to my folder, go find my texture sheet. Here it is. And there we go. I'll load it up in my browser down here so you can see it better. Okay, so clearly you can see how some of these are stretching. I'm going to switch to face mode, and I'll go ahead and choose these rocks here. So you can see how these rocks, again, I can select these here, grab them, move them down. There we go. And you can see that it's matching up just fine. And again, you can go ahead and you can edit your UVs over here, but you can see it's working out pretty nice and fine. And I can just kind of line it up. And there we go. And again, you just go around and you figure out what you want. So I'll select the grass one, come over here. And the cool thing is I can come over to my UV editor and I can grab it and I can move it and I can just say, nope, I want this to be metal or concrete. You can